Hey guys! Tonight we begin a journey back through time to meet a man who could shake an entire civilization with just a few questions. Socrates, the bald, barefoot old man of Athens who never wrote a single word yet, has kept humanity debating for over 400 years. From questions that seemed almost childish to a death as quiet as the end of a lecture. This is not just a story of philosophy, but a story of the courage of intellect. If you enjoy stories that are a little bit historical, a little bit cheeky, and a whole lot thought-provoking, don't forget to follow this channel. But only if you genuinely enjoy what you are hearing. If you are not sure yet, keep listening. Who knows? Just like Socrates, you might start with one simple question. Wait. Do I really understand this? And be sure to leave a comment to let me know where and when you are listening, because there is something magical about all of us gathering each night from different time zones in the same space of curiosity. Now then, dim the lights a little, turn on a fan if you want some gentle background noise, and let us step into the world of Socrates, where every question is a quiet revolution. If ancient Athens had a leaderboard for most annoying person of all time, Socrates would undoubtedly hold the #1 spot, and no one would dare contest it. In an era where people placed their faith in gods, honor, and oddly shaped bronze helmets, this bald, barefoot, pot-bellied old man wandered the streets, poking straight at the pride of others, with a single disarming question. Are you sure you know what you think you know? He did not teach. He did not write books. He did not charge tuition. He did not even have a fixed seat to call his own. Socrates roamed every corner of Athens, waving his hands and speaking as if live streaming 24/7, unfiltered, uninvited, and utterly unconcerned with the idea of pleasing his listeners. If you think modern reaction YouTubers have mastered the art of exposure, then Socrates was the original master doing it 400 years ago. Every one of his dialogues was like a reaction video. The other person would say something, he would counter with a question, and then that person would fall right into a trap of their own reasoning. Socrates was not a transmitter of knowledge. He was a demolitionist of smug thinking. Imagine him as a TikToker, specializing in shattering personal beliefs, strolling through markets, courts, sports arenas, weddings, even funerals, anywhere people gathered, and asking, "So you say justice is what?" Again, repeat that for me. This thing you call morality. Where did you learn that? From your father, or those invisible guys atop Mount Olympus. You just claimed the soul is immortal. Define soul for me. Let's hear it. And make no mistake, he did not ask to learn. He asked to unravel the entire belief system of others, with a tone that was blunt, sharp, and sometimes abrasive. Socrates was like the guy leading a subreddit titled Am I the Asshole?, except he was logically correct 100% of the time. At first, Athenians found him amusing, then odd, then painful, and finally infuriating, because there is nothing more aggravating than being questioned to the point of realizing you do not know a damn thing, especially in front of a crowd. Picture yourself as an upstanding citizen, well-educated, respected a mentor with a seat on the city council, and then this barefoot old man appears, asks 3 questions, and turns you into a puppet of flawed logic. Your entire worldview, nurtured since childhood, begins to wobble like a house built on sand. Meanwhile, Socrates simply furrows his brow, nods, and drops the final blow. So we have now demonstrated that you too do not know. Boom. If Instagram stories had existed, Socrates would probably post captions like, "When you ask the right question, the mask falls off." Like a living meme, he needed no effects, only the silence that followed each of his questions. Strangely, he was never arrogant. On the contrary, he constantly declared, "I know nothing." But that claim was his secret weapon. It gave him license to question endlessly. And when you have nothing to assert, you have nothing to lose. Socrates wielded "I do not know" as a shield and his questions as a sword. Thus he engaged in dialogue like it was battle, not bloody, but leaving bruises on the ego. Some thought Socrates was mad. Others said he was obsessed with tearing apart logic for fun. But in truth, he was chasing something even more dangerous than knowledge, the awareness that we could be wrong. For him, doubting oneself was the highest form of intelligence. Now, let us fast forward to the modern day. Have you ever scrolled through the internet and found an argument where everyone is convinced they are right, from politics to nutrition, from morality to artificial intelligence? Everyone has sources, links, opinions. And everyone is absolutely certain their view is for the good of humanity. In that world, if Socrates were to show up, he would not need to shout. He would just ask, "You think you are right because you believe. But where did your belief begin?" The internet would catch fire. And that is exactly why, despite having lived nearly 2 millennia before the rise of content creators, Socrates remains the original influencer, a man who never wrote a single word, yet made all of Western philosophy orbit him like planets around the sun. The 5th century before Christ, Athens was not just a city-state. It was a philosophy factory, a kind of Hollywood for ideas where every street corner featured an intellectual performer putting on a live show of reasoning. You might picture Athens as a land of marble statues and gladiatorial arenas, and you would not be wrong. But it was also a place with a higher density of philosophers than Seattle has Starbucks. Socrates, Plato, Parmenides, Heraclitus, Anaxagoras. Every name as long as a hotel Wi-Fi password, and minds as sharp as razors. They did not meditate or chant mantras. They spoke, questioned, challenged, reasoned, and debated until their voices gave out. Every tavern was a classroom. Every temple, a TED Talk stage of the ancient world. Make no mistake, these were not lonely old men talking to walls. Philosophy in those days was as hot as stand-up comedy is now, drawing crowds, sparking controversy, and gaining loyal fans just as intense as any K-pop fandom. Anyone with a worldview bold enough, sharp enough, and bizarre enough could become a star or a heretic, or both. If you had a brain wired to ask strange questions, Athens would hand you a stage. But if your questions poked too deeply into what was sacred, what was trusted, or what made people feel embarrassed, then congratulations. You were well on your way to drinking the same hemlock cup that Socrates did. In a world where people still believed that Zeus hurled lightning bolts to punish wrongdoers, asking something like, "Do the gods really sit around tallying up our moral points every day?" was like asking the FBI if there were hidden microphones in your house, dangerous and definitely unwelcome. So why did Athens produce so many Socrates-like thinkers? The answer lies in an intriguing paradox. Ancient Athens was a democracy, but a young one. Think of it like a 5-year-old wearing a crown and being told, "Today you are king." The people had the right to speak, to debate, to vote, but they were also filled with fear, suspicion, and an extreme sensitivity to anyone who asked the wrong question at the wrong time. Socrates, of course, did not care. While many philosophers of the time sought ways to win public favor, Socrates made it his mission to enrage the public. He did not build theories. He did not start schools. He did not give grand speeches. He only asked. And the way he asked made people go silent. That made him stand out from all the other philosophical performers on the Athenian stage. Plato. He wrote an entire library defending his beliefs. Aristotle. Took notes like a Harvard researcher preparing a grant proposal. Pythagoras envisioned a universe revolving around mathematics. And Socrates, just an unstoppable mouth poking at people's minds like a gamer speed-running Dark Souls on a broken keyboard. And Athens loved, then hated that. Because Athens was a place that allowed everyone to speak, but not everyone wanted to hear the truth. You were free to talk, so long as you did not ask the kind of questions that could shake the whole foundation. It was like YouTube letting you comment, but the algorithm quietly punishing you for pushing the wrong narrative. To Athens, Socrates was a glitch in the democratic system, a man with no office, no wealth, no title, yet possessing the terrifying power to make people feel stupid, openly, and with ruthless logic. Here was a mighty city-state building, its dream of power war and territorial expansion, and yet allowing a barefoot old man to wander around, questioning the very essence of justice, truth, and morality. It was like inviting your most savage Yelp reviewer into a national strategy meeting. And the ultimate irony. It was Athens, the birthplace of democracy and intellectual freedom, that became the first place in history to execute someone for their ideas. Imagine someone standing in front of you wearing a gentle smile, nodding as he listens patiently to your ideas about justice, morality, and the soul, and then softly asks, "So how would you define justice exactly?" You take a deep breath and reply with confidence and clarity. Justice is doing the right thing. He nods, eyes lighting up as if catching a signal, and then follows up. Then what is right? And how do you know it is right? Boom. The game has begun. Socrates did not argue. He never needed to prove himself right, because he never claimed to be. He only asked questions, but in a way that made your brain overheat like a graphics card, processing 4K video without a cooling fan. And with nothing but gentle questions, he could quietly unravel your entire belief system, and you would not even notice until it was too late. That was the art of an intellectual provocateur, not attacking head-on, but inviting you to build a house of logic together, only to gently show you that you had been laying the foundation on sand. Today we have psychologists, life coaches, keynote speakers, even smart chatbots. But no one has ever done what Socrates did barehanded with no notes, no slides, just questions, so innocent, they were terrifying. And here was the secret: he did not provoke out of hatred, but out of genuine care. Socrates believed that people were not evil, just ignorant. And if you helped them see that they knew nothing at all, you had just led them to the very first step toward wisdom. But he did not coddle anyone either. No hand-holding, no comforting lines like, "Every opinion is valid in its own way." No. If you were inconsistent, he pointed it out. If you dodged, he pulled you back. If you got lost, he kept asking. until you either had an epiphany or stormed off in frustration. Socrates' style was a mix of childlike curiosity and the intellectual firepower of a truth-hacking ninja. He did not argue to win, he argued to expose. But truth, as always, is something few people want to confront head-on. His method was later called maieutic, the art of midwifery for ideas. Socrates did not deliver knowledge, he helped others give birth to it. But birthing ideas, much like birthing children, can be painful, chaotic, and sometimes nothing comes out at all. A Socratic conversation did not feel like talking. It felt like being interrogated in an intellectual prison. And instead of electric shocks, he used pure logic. Take this for example. You. I think courage is the absence of fear. Socrates. So a fool who jumps into fire without understanding the danger, is he courageous? You. No. Socrates. Then courage is not the absence of fear. It is knowing fear and acting anyway. You. I guess so. Socrates. Then what is courage? You. Welcome to the mind maze. In this way, he created a weapon not to destroy, but to liberate. To free people from the most dangerous thing of all, the illusion that they understand the world. And here is the funny part. It was precisely because he never gave final answers that people became even more upset. Society wants conclusions, closure theories. But Socrates simply said, closure. What closure? Keep asking. In an age where everyone is desperately hunting for truth, like searching for strong Wi-Fi, Socrates simply said, I do not know, but I know that you do not know either. If there is one sentence that has driven the entire world of philosophy insane, from ancient Athens to Harvard professors, it would be, I know only that I know nothing. It sounds simple, like something a lazy student might mumble to dodge an oral quiz. But when Socrates said it, he was not avoiding knowledge, he was making a dangerously bold statement about the very nature of human intelligence. In a society where people walked around with the confidence of having Wikipedia installed in their brains, where every citizen thought they understood justice, morality, the cosmos, the gods, and even parenting, for a man to step into the middle of the public square and declare I know nothing was both humble and provocative. In fact, it was like showing up to a citywide debate competition and being the only one who raised his hand to drop out before it even began. And yet, instead of being ridiculed, he became the center of attention. Because while everyone else was busy flexing their intellect, he was the only one brave enough to expose humanity's uncertainty before the universe. And so the paradox began. Socrates did not know, but he knew that he did not know, while everyone else did not know and did not know that they did not know. From there, he flipped the world upside down with a new definition of wisdom. A wise person is not someone who knows much, but someone who clearly understands the limits of their own knowledge. Boom. It was no longer just a sentence. It was a philosophical grenade hurled into the ego of all Athens and beyond. Because how could an ignorant man be wiser than a knowledgeable one? Had we not always believed that to know more was to be greater? But Socrates said no. Knowing a lot while being blind to your own errors, that is more dangerous than ignorance. and thus not knowing became an aesthetic, a lifestyle, a conscious choice of existence. You do not say, "I do not know," as an apology. You say it as an opening to questions, doubt, reconsideration, and inquiry. It means you do not trap the world in a fixed frame. You see it as fluid, ambiguous, and full of surprise. That is why Socrates disliked giving definitions. Every time someone tried to finalize a concept like justice, courage, or goodness, he would step back, stroke his chin, and ask, "Does that apply in all situations? Does it contradict what you said 5 minutes ago? What would you do if I gave a counterexample? Sound familiar, like a difficult professor, or an AI stuck in an endless loop? No." This was his art, not to act as the one who knows, but as a mirror, so others could reflect on themselves. And the irony was this: in Socrates' time, not having a firm opinion made him more terrifying than any radical. Because you cannot argue with someone who has no fixed position, only questions. In modern politics, "I do not know" is often used to dodge accountability. On talk shows, it is a conversation killer. In job interviews, it is a red flag. But to Socrates, it was the beginning. It was a rebellious statement, a slap in the face of what we call knowledge, and the only way to avoid becoming a victim of our own intelligence. But hold on. Do not mistake Socrates for a nihilist. He was not telling you to burn your books or stop thinking. Quite the opposite. He urged you to think all the way through, only to discover that the cliff at the end of the road was not absolute truth, but a vast space of potential. And it is in that very space where you do not know, where you are confused, where you are disoriented, that philosophy truly begins. Because philosophy is not about answers. It is about asking questions deep enough that you stop being sure of anything except that you must keep asking. Socrates was a living paradox. He was the greatest philosopher in the history of the Western world, the one who laid the foundation for knowledge, critical thinking, ethics, and method. And yet, he wrote nothing. There was no Analects of Athens, no Greek version of the Tao Te Ching, no bedside philosophy book. Everything we know about him comes from others. Plato, Xenophon, Aristophanes, and his enemies through court indictments. If Socrates lived today, he would not have a blog, no podcast, not even TikTok. He did not preserve ideas on paper, he stored them in people's minds. His thoughts lived by leaping from one head to another like a philosophical virus spreading through conversation. Why? Because to him, knowledge was not something to store, it was something to live with, wrestle with, argue about, and dismantle. Socrates did not write, not because he was lazy or short on time, but because he did not trust writing. Sounds absurd. Listen to his favorite student, Plato. In Phaedrus, Socrates retells a myth. Thoth, the god who invented writing, presents his invention to Pharaoh Thamus. Thoth says, "Writing will help people remember more and become wiser." But Thamus replies, "No, writing will cause people to forget because they will rely on symbols instead of understanding. They will think they know when they have only heard." Boom. That was Socrates' argument. Writing cannot replace living thought. It freezes words, but cannot react, cannot question back, cannot go deeper. It makes people believe they understand, but the understanding is shallow, false, and lazy. Socrates chose speech, real live dialogue impossible to edit, impossible to rewind. In an age without Ctrl+Z, he took the most radical path, leaving no trace, only impact. If he had written, his ideas could have been quoted, imposed, memorized. But by not writing, he forced each person to understand him for themselves, to doubt for themselves, to recreate him in their own mind. And that is what made him immortal. Ask yourself how many philosophers have been forgotten because they wrote too much, wrote at the wrong time, or were misunderstood. But Socrates could never be misquoted because he never quoted himself. Not writing was his boldest philosophical statement. In our age, where everything can be documented from angry tweets to spiritual diaries, leaving nothing behind is a radical choice. It made him a living legend, a ghost of wisdom that everyone wants to decode, but no one can package. Plato recorded his words, but through Plato's eyes. Aristophanes mocked him in the clouds as a nutcase who questioned the sky. His enemies described him as a dangerous corrupter of youth. And because he never responded, he belonged to everyone and to no one. Socrates was a mirror, and every person who wrote about him was really writing about themselves. Want him to be a saint? You will see that. Want him to be a menace? You will see that too. Want him as a symbol of wisdom? Go ahead. Want him as a living meme? He fits perfectly. That was the genius of a man who never said anything clearly, so everyone was forced to think more clearly. Now compare that to modern society. Today, we leave behind everything. Instagram stories, status updates, reaction videos, emails, digital notes, book highlights. But the more we record, the less time we seem to spend living an actual thought. We collect knowledge like stamp collectors, pretty to look at, but never truly used. Socrates, on the other hand, had no library. Yet he could walk straight into your mind and peel back layers of belief like a surgeon removing a tumor of assumption using nothing but his voice. Some fall by the sword. Others perish through political schemes, assassinations, or misguided loyalty. And Socrates. He died for asking too many questions. It sounds absurd, but it is historical fact. One of the sharpest minds to ever exist brought to trial and sentenced to death. Not for treason, not for murder, not for tax evasion, but for corrupting the youth and failing to honor the gods of the city. Translated into modern terms, he made young people think differently and asked uncomfortable questions. And for a society desperately trying to regain stability after war that was unacceptable. The backdrop, Athens, after its devastating defeat in the Peloponnesian War against Sparta. A once glorious city-state, now stripped of soldiers' honor and power. Internally fractured. Democracy shaken. Religious faith eroded. The entire city was in need of someone to blame. And then, as if by fate, they found Socrates, a strange old man who neither farmed nor traded, had no formal job, but wandered about interrogating others. Young people loved listening to him, and then went home to argue with their parents. He made the educated question themselves, the powerful look foolish, and turned grand sermons on morality into laughable logic traps. Too dangerous, too inconvenient, too infuriating. And you know how it goes. Society can forgive a murderer more easily than someone who makes others feel stupid, without ever raising his voice. So on a sunny day in 399 BC, Socrates was dragged to court to face charges as vague as Reddit rumors. 1. Failing to honor the officially recognized gods of the city. 2. Introducing new gods. 3. Corrupting the youth. And did he beg for mercy? Apologize, flatter the crowd. Socrates defended himself as if it were just another round of debate. He asked, I corrupt the youth. Then who improves them? Who teaches them anything better? He asked, if I believe in new gods, how does that make me an atheist? He asked, have I ever claimed to teach anyone? Have I ever charged fees? Then how is this called corruption? The entire defense recorded in Plato's Apologia reads like an ancient diss track. No profanity, no violence, but every counter-question was a dagger exposing the contradictions in the prosecution. And the crowd unsettled, irritated. They could not refute him, but they could not bear the feeling of being unmasked either. So what did they do? They voted for the death penalty by forcing him to drink cicuta or hemlock. One of the slowest, most paralyzing, most silent ways to die, fitting for a man whose words were silent killers. They did not kill him because he was powerful. They killed him because he made them unbearable to themselves. And when people can no longer bear the truth, they eliminate the one who speaks it. You might call this the first death of free thought in Western history. And it did not come at the hands of a tyrant, but from democracy itself. That is what makes it all the more ironic. Athens, proud of its freedom, could not stomach one dissenting voice. That was too sharp. And Socrates, he did not run. He did not plead for leniency. He did not agree to stay quiet to save his life. On the contrary, he declared, an unexamined life is not worth living. He chose death not as a victim, but as a final philosophical blow. A living manifesto that true wisdom never compromises for comfort. Think about that in our own time. How many public figures have been canceled for saying something that challenged the crowd? How many people censor themselves to avoid trouble? How many ideas have died early deaths, simply for not aligning with the algorithm? Socrates is a reminder. Thinking is never comfortable, and sometimes honest discomfort is more dangerous than violence. Some people die quietly. Some die for glory, for land, for ideals. And Socrates. He died as if concluding a lecture. On that fateful day in 399 BC, in the bare cell where he was held, Socrates stepped before his disciples without tears, without trembling, without bitterness. He smiled softly, spoke as usual, and began a dialogue. Yes. Even when preparing to drink poison, Socrates was still questioning, still reasoning, still debating. Someone might have asked, why not escape? People were ready to help you flee. Athens. Socrates only shrugged. Why run? A man who has chosen to live by principle must also accept dying by it. It was not that he wanted to die, but neither did he want to live a life that avoided the truth. If it meant giving up questioning, giving up dialogue, giving up the belief that thinking must be honest, then what was the point of living? While waiting for the poison to arrive, he continued talking with his students. Plato recounted that he even discussed whether the soul was immortal and analyzed whether death should be feared at all. Anyone who can give a philosophical dissertation moments before dying, you know you are witnessing the most carefully choreographed death scene in the history of human thought. Death for Socrates was not a tragedy. It was a logical event, a conclusion to a lifelong journey of questioning. No bitterness, no excuses, no drama. It was as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. We do not know what death is. Perhaps it is a dreamless sleep that sounds pleasant. Or if the soul lives on, I will meet Homer Hesiod and have conversations with them. Even in death, Socrates turned it into a long-form philosophical interview. And then the cup of poison was brought in. Cicuta hemlock does not kill through violent pain. It paralyzes slowly from the feet upward. The legs go cold first, then the body, then the chest, and finally the heart. You feel yourself dying, but cannot stop it. A slow death, and Socrates chose it. No flinching, no begging, no panic. He lifted the cup. No grand speech. No dramatic hand gestures. No flashy last words. He drank it like one would drink a final fated medicine, then lay down calmly, allowing his body to disappear, according to the natural process. Those around him wept. Plato, according to accounts, was so overcome that he could not bear to witness the final moment. And Socrates, just before death, he turned to Crito, a lifelong friend, and said, "Do not forget to repay the rooster to Asclepius. I owe him that." It may sound trivial, but in truth, it was his final philosophical statement. Asclepius was the god of healing. In Greek culture, people would offer a rooster to him in gratitude after being cured of an illness. By reminding his friend to make that offering, Socrates was suggesting that his death was a kind of cure, a healing from the illness of an imperfect and irrational life. A death, but also a philosophical release. No blood, no chaos, just a final reminder. Do not forget to live rightly, and to die rightly. In modern cinema, death is often the emotional climax. The music swells, tears fall, the camera spins. But Socrates, he faded out like a logical light, no smoke, no sound, but leaving behind an echo that still resonates thousands of years later. We live in an age flooded with noise, but starved for people who know when to be silent. We run from death, yet die a little each day in small moral compromises. But Socrates, he lived clearly, so he died clearly. And that is what made him the first anti-philosopher, the one who dared to live exactly as he thought. Have you ever watched a reaction video where a YouTuber sits and watches someone cooking singing off-key or confidently presenting their genius argument? The real entertainment is in their expressions, the raised eyebrows, the skeptical smirk, the surprised laugh. They do not create content, they react to it. And in that reaction, they expose what others might not see. Now, erase YouTube from your mind. Travel back to Athens 400 years ago. No camera, no filters, no like buttons. Just an old bald man barefoot sitting with a carpenter, a soldier, a poet. And when the other person just barely utters a sentence about justice, courage, or beauty, the old man tilts his head and gently asks, "Oh, why do you think that?" Welcome to the Socratic method, the art of becoming a living reaction powered by pure intellect. No affirmations, no conclusions, just a chain of responses asking, listening, digging, deeper, pressing back, going further until the other person realizes they were standing on quicksand, not stone. It is essentially a reaction podcast in a world without technology. Socrates wandered from place to place, reacting to everything people thought was certain. You claim to know what justice is. He questions you. You say you understand morality. He frowns, nods, and asks again. You speak of the soul. He does not deny. He just asks you to define it, locate it, measure it, and explain who told you about it. What makes it scary is Socrates was not mocking. He was not trolling. He was asking seriously, and that seriousness unsettled you, because he forced you to answer yourself with logic, not emotion. And when emotion collides with logic, most belief systems collapse like an IKEA table missing screws. That is why Socrates did not need to teach anything. His method was not about delivering knowledge. It was about activating doubt. He did not give you answers. He dissected your questions, exposing the emptiness inside them. A classic example is his dialogue with Euthyphro, a priest confidently suing his own father. Yes, suing your dad was moral in ancient Greece, if you believed you were doing the right thing. Socrates asks, what makes an action moral? Is it because the gods love it, or do they love it because it is already right? Boom. That is the Euthyphro dilemma. A simple logical trap that continues to trouble theologians to this day. If something is moral because the gods love it, then morality is based on divine preference. But if the gods love it because it is already right, then there must be a moral standard beyond the gods, which means you cannot simultaneously depend on divine authority and believe in absolute moral truth. And with that, Euthyphro's whole lawsuit against his father vanishes in Socrates' logic. That is the power of the Socratic method. It does not build ideologies, it stress tests the ideologies of others. It is like earthquake testing a building. Shake it hard enough, and you will see what holds and what collapses. In today's world, experts might use SWOT frameworks, data analysis, or A/B testing. Socrates just needed the right question at the right time in the right silence. It demands something our modern world sorely lacks: active listening and the patience not to fix someone immediately. Instead of shouting, "You're wrong," Socrates would say, "That is interesting. But does this not contradict that?" His questions did not attack you. They guided you into a dead end that you walked into yourself. That is why his method is hard to teach, hard to sell, and nearly impossible to put into a syllabus. No one teaches how to listen correctly, ask gracefully, or know when to stay silent, so others collapse under their own logic. That is why Socrates is both the father of critical thinking and the philosopher who could never be cloned. You can mimic his words, but it is far harder to mimic the art of knowing exactly when to say nothing. Socrates has no real monument, no grand tomb, no best-selling bedside book called Philosophy in 10 Easy Steps. In fact, we do not even have a single word written by his own hand. And perhaps that is exactly how he wanted it. Because in a world obsessed with leaving a legacy, Socrates chose to become a question mark. A question without a period. No definite form. No exact quote. Only retellings, debates, reimaginings, contradictions, doubt. And remarkably, it is that very emptiness, that made him the irreplaceable core of Western philosophy. You cannot teach philosophy without starting with Socrates. Without him, there would be no Plato. Without Plato, no Aristotle. And without Aristotle, Europe would lack the foundations of logic, ethics, and even natural science. Socrates did not teach you what to think. He taught you to ask why you think that way. And from that, every field begins, from political science, education, psychology, and ethics, to even artificial intelligence. Because you can train a machine to do math, but you cannot train a machine to question the very beliefs it is built on. Only humans, and specifically humans like Socrates, dare to turn their own thinking inside out and ask, what if I was wrong? From the very first idea, the modern world has tried many times to organize Socrates. Films, books, memes. I know nothing, but I know you're wrong, but he always slips through every mold. Too little data to turn into a saint. Too little system to turn into a doctrine. Too few answers to turn into dogma. He is a gust of logic passing through the centuries, impossible to catch, but unforgettable to those it touches. And not everyone likes him. Pragmatists say he is impractical. The devout call him godless. The conservatives see him as a threat. The progressives find themselves questioned in turn. Only one thing is certain. No one can ignore him. In a world increasingly wrapped in the bubble of I am right, from politics to culture to education to tech, Socrates is the reminder that what we are most certain of might be what we misunderstand most deeply. You think you understand love, morality, freedom, happiness. Socrates would not tell you you are wrong. He would simply ask, what is freedom? Are your feelings shaped by society? Do you love, or do you just need someone to shield you from fear? No one lives forever. But a true legacy is not a statue, a street name, or a memorial day. A true legacy is making others question themselves centuries after you are gone. And that is what Socrates accomplished. Not through war, not through wealth, not through media, but through the sheer force of an intellect that never stopped asking. When you sit in class and someone asks the teacher, why is that? When you hear a podcast guest begin to doubt their old beliefs, when you stand between two opinions and suddenly feel unsure, that is Socrates reborn. He does not live in books. He lives in your most honest moments of doubt. On the island of Crete, where the waves of the Mediterranean crash against rocky shores like a voice echoing from 1,000 years ago, there lies a strange ruin. It is not a pyramid, nor a temple, nor a grand mausoleum. It is a labyrinth of limestone, its edges faded by time, its pillars weathered by sea winds. Yet if you step quietly inside, past the chipped steps and down silent hallways, you will feel something uncanny, as if this place is not dead, but merely asleep. Knossos. The name sounds like a whisper, rising from the throat of history. It does not shout, like Rome does not strut, like Babylon does not loom, like Giza. And yet, it haunts more deeply than all of them. For Knossos is not merely a palace, it is a gateway leading down to the deepest chambers of human memory, where we bury fear, myth, and what no one dares to name. In the spiral corridors of Knossos, it was once believed that a monster dwelled, not a man-eating beast like a dragon or serpent, but a creature born of shame and solitude. The Minotaur, half man, half bull, imprisoned for life in a maze built by his own father. Each year he was offered 7 young men and 7 maidens from Athens. No one ever came back, and no one ever asked why. Centuries later, people called it a myth. But behind every myth, there is always a truth that once breathed. Knossos was once the heartbeat of the Minoan civilization, one of the oldest in Europe. It was not built for defense. No walls, no watchtowers. Every structure was open, like a heart unafraid. Within the palace, people danced with bulls, a ritual known as taurokathapsia. On the walls, frescoes painted goddesses, dolphins, and dancers suspended in midair. That world did not worship war, it worshipped rhythm. But it was that very softness that caused it to be devoured. In the 15th century before Christ, a chain of disasters struck. The volcano of Thera erupted. A tsunami, dozens of feet high, about 30 to 45 feet, or approximately 9 to 14 meters, swept across the shores of Crete. Then came the Mycenaeans from the mainland. Knossos was burned. And from then on, it slipped out of time like a forgotten dream. Nearly 3,000 years later, an Englishman named Arthur Evans came to this place. He did not merely excavate Knossos, he reimagined it through his own eyes. The walls were repainted, the columns were rebuilt, and so a labyrinth half real, half imagined emerged in the modern world. Knossos became a stage. But who are the actors? Who is the audience? And who has rewritten the script? To walk through Knossos today is to enter a dream made of stone. Every hallway curves. Every room leads to another. There is no center, no clear line between inside and out. That is not a design flaw. That is intent. The Minoans did not build their palace to control, they built it to conceal. To conceal what? Perhaps the soft power of a civilization that needed no weapons. Perhaps the shame of a creature condemned to solitude. Or perhaps it conceals us, those who build labyrinths in our minds, to avoid facing the beast called truth. The Minotaur is not terrifying. He is merely forgotten. And Knossos did not collapse from stone. It fell because people stopped believing in what could not be explained. When did we start trusting only what could be measured? When did repeating hallways make us dizzy instead of curious? Today, when you pass through the gates of Knossos, you will not hear the bellowing of bulls, nor see the goddess in her pleated skirt beneath the cypress tree. But if you close your eyes, you may sense a dance whose rhythm does not lie in the feet, but in the heart. Knossos is where time is not linear, where myth needs no justification, where being lost is not a mistake, but a ritual. And that labyrinth, it still stands open. Before Athens embraced democracy, before Sparta forged men into steel, there was Crete. An island rising from the Mediterranean like a pearl adrift in silver waves. And on that island, more than 4,000 years ago, a radiant civilization emerged, like the very first dawn of Europe. They did not call themselves Minoan. That name came later from the mouths of those searching for the past. But what they left behind their walls painted with light, their frescoes absent of war, their chambers built without bunkers, told a different tale. The story of a kingdom without fear. Knossos. Their palace was not surrounded by fortresses, no watchtowers, no shelters. Everything was open, as if the entire city was an invitation. Step through its gates, and you will see sunlight cascading across the walls, wind whispering through crimson columns, and the murmur of water echoing from the intricate system of underground channels. A city that knew how to breathe. A palace designed to sing. There the Minoans did not sculpt statues of kings, nor build stone tombs. They worshipped the goddess of fertility, of wind, of the sacred bull. In their frescoes, women appeared more often than men. They were priestesses, dancers, leaders of ceremony. There were no scenes of conquest, no monuments of victory. The Minoan world revolved around cycles, the moon-flowing water harvest seasons, menstrual blood, and rebirth. One image repeats again and again in Minoan art, the bull, not hunted, but honored. In the ritual of tarokathapsia, young men and women leapt over the backs of bulls like a dance between human and beast. It was not a spectacle, it was a pact, between humanity and nature, between life and instinct. To the Minoans, living meant attuning, knowing when to retreat, when to reach. Not everyone was a warrior, but everyone was an artist. The structure of Knossos did not follow a vertical hierarchy. No throne stood at the heart of a plaza. Every hallway twisted. Every room flowed into another, as if this place did not serve a single king, but a continuous cycle of rituals. The space was soft, flexible, full of rhythm, just like the society that built it. What greater measure of a civilization than the fact that it did not need swords to prove its greatness? The Minoans were seafarers, trading with Egypt, the Near East, and mainland Greece. But instead of bringing home spoils of war, they brought back color spices and stories. Crete became a vital knot in the Bronze Age trade network. But more importantly, they chose to build a world that did not place violence at its core. Nowhere else in the ancient Mediterranean did women hold such elevated roles. Nowhere else were the city walls so deliberately left out. Nowhere else did a palace resemble a poem more than a fortress. They did not endure forever. No one does. But in their moment of existence, the Minoans left a mark, one that offered a quiet rebuttal to history that humankind does not need to conquer in order to become great. When archaeologist Arthur Evans discovered Knossos in the early 20th century, he did not find weapons. He did not find a king's tomb. He found color, deep red, dark blue, radiant gold, sea green. He saw dancers, dolphins swimming, and rooms bathed in light. That was the legacy of the Minoans, not power, but beauty. A beauty that did not defend itself. And so it was fragile. Later, the Mycenaeans came warriors from the mainland, and the story would change. But that is the tragedy of the next act. Here in the beginning, imagine a world where people danced instead of fought, where women walked at the height of sacred ceremony, where the sun was painted not thunder gods worshipped. That was the Minoan world. That was Knossos, a palace not built to protect, but to open its heart. No civilization has ever existed without leaving behind a shadow of itself. For the Minoans, that shadow lies buried beneath the tangled layers of stone and earth at Knossos, not where the light touches, but where the imagination is trapped, where the labyrinth begins. The Minotaur, a creature half man, half bull, has no statue in Knossos, no ancient inscription to describe him. And yet, he has lived on more powerfully than gods carved in stone. For thousands of years, his name has echoed through generations and cultures like a nameless fear passed down in silence. According to Greek mythology, King Minos, the legendary founder of Knossos, once prayed to Poseidon for a sacred white bull. The god granted his wish. But when the bull arrived, Minos kept it rather than sacrificing it. Enraged, the god cursed Minos's wife Pasiphae to fall in love with the bull. From that doomed union, the Minotaur was born, a misshapen being, a child no one dared to call their own. Terrified, Minos hired Daedalus, the master architect, to build a labyrinth to imprison the hybrid child, a maze with no exit. Those who entered never returned. No one saw the Minotaur's face, only heard his roar. And each year, Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women as tribute to the beast of Knossos. No one questioned why Athens agreed. No one asked why it had to be 7. No one wondered whether the Minotaur could cry. We accept myths the way we accept fear. Then one day, Prince Theseus of Athens volunteered to enter the labyrinth. With the help of Princess Ariadne, who loved him, Theseus carried a spool of thread. He killed the Minotaur, followed the thread back out, and escaped the island with Ariadne. That is how the Greeks told the story of reason triumphing over instinct. But if you stand in Knossos today, lost among rooms that lead into more rooms down corridors that seem to double back on themselves, you might suspect something else. The labyrinth is real. More than 1,000 rooms, each one leading in a different direction. No clear center, no vertical structure, just spiral upon spiral, like a mind spiraling into panic. Perhaps the labyrinth is not merely architecture. Perhaps it is metaphor. A metaphor for an empire trying to hide the deepest part of itself. Hiding what no one wants to see. Hiding a living being, not because he was dangerous, but because he reminded them of something most shameful consequence. The Minotaur was not evil. He merely existed. And the only thing that made him a monster was being born of a mistake no one dared claim. He was imprisoned not for what he did, but for what he was. A child not allowed to exist. A secret locked in stone. And the labyrinth, it was the desperate attempt to bury that secret. Not to escape a monster, but to escape oneself. Perhaps that is the truth of any civilization. Beneath every radiant palace, there is a labyrinth. Beneath every golden wall, a child locked away, symbol of all that society cannot bear to face. A collective shame given the shape of a creature. The Minotaur is the raw truth distorted into myth. Theseus killed him, perhaps not to free Athens, but to bury memory. And Ariadne, the girl who gave him the thread, was left behind. As if truth, once it has served its purpose, must be forgotten. We have called the Minotaur a monster for millennia. But perhaps he was the first victim of public narrative, of power, of whoever gets to tell the story first. So where does the real labyrinth lie? Not beneath the stones of Knossos, not in the memory of Greece. The labyrinth lives in the human mind, where we build thousands of rooms, hundreds of winding corridors, all to avoid a single truth that there are parts of ourselves which are not perfect, not accepted, and so they must be locked away. The Minotaur does not roar. He simply waits in silence. And Knossos, that palace of light, may well be an inverted Pandora's box glittering on the outside, and within it a darkness that has yet to be named. If there was ever a moment in history when Knossos not only existed, but radiated like a crystal of human spirit, it was during the second millennium before Christ, the golden age of the Minoans. At that time, Knossos was not a relic. It was the beating heart of a civilization, a living body made of stone, water, light, and human rhythm. No one lived in Knossos as if in a fortress. They lived as if in a dance. From above, the palace resembled no other ancient structure. No symmetry, no solemn vertical axis, no sign of a center of power. But if you close your eyes and listen, you will sense a body breathing corridors, as blood vessels, skylights as lungs, and the deep red columns as the spine of the Minoan soul. There, light was the primary material of architecture. The Minoans built skylights so that sunlight could pour into bedrooms. They left open spaces for the sea breeze to carry its scent into ceremonial chambers. They opened frames so that frescoes could live with the passing hours, changing colors as the light shifted. Walls were not merely barriers to wind, they were storytellers. Upon them danced figures spinning in motion, dolphins gliding across the waves, and goddesses lifting their arms as though balancing the cosmos itself. These frescoes bore no message of fear or domination, but mirrored the belief that the world moved by grace. Nowhere else in the ancient world was water so revered in a palace. Knossos had a complex system for clean water and waste, bathtubs, underground pipes, and even flushing toilets. At a time when other city-states were still carving names into stone, the Minoans had already taught stone how to flow like a stream. In Knossos, there was no grand throne glittering at the heart of a great hall, no altar carved with the image of a war god. The only throne ever discovered was a modest stone seat resting in a humble chamber surrounded by auxiliary stools, as if power resided not in height but in presence, as if a leader was there not to command but to listen. Knossos did not separate the sacred from the everyday, for every space was sacred. A bedroom could become a sanctuary. A staircase could become a stage for ritual dance. That fluidity was not just in the walls, it flowed through the way of life. It is believed that those who lived in Knossos did not sleep in silence, but to the sound of running water. They did not dine in isolation, but beside golden light streaming through narrow slits. They did not live in fear, but in rhythm with the seasons, with the moon, with breath itself. Once this place was the trading hub of the entire Mediterranean. From Knossos ships sailed to Egypt, Syria, Anatolia, and mainland Greece. But instead of returning with trophies of war, the Minoans brought back textiles, fragrant oils, symbols, and ideas. They expanded not by sword, but by sail. Rarely does a civilization reach its peak without building watchtowers, without dispatching warriors, without turning architecture into a symbol of fear. Knossos was the pinnacle of soft thought, a testament that beauty, when embraced as an ideology, can elevate the human spirit more than any decree. But that is also why it was fragile. Beauty does not defend itself, and in history, that which does not defend itself is often the first to be devoured. So do not see Knossos as a fallen empire. See it as a moment of brilliance, like lightning before the storm, like a final dance before the curtain falls. Today, as you walk through the rooms that still remain, you can still feel the wind. You can still see light reflecting off rough stone floors. You can still make out the faint traces of deep red and blue on the walls. And if you close your eyes, you will hear a breath, not anyone's, but that of a palace that once lived. No light lasts forever. No dance continues without pause. And no city that lives by peace can escape one day being swept into the fury of the world. Knossos, the palace without walls, the radiant heart of the Minoans, stepped into darkness, like a moon dissolving into the tide. Not by sword, not by civil unrest, but by a chain of events beyond human control. Around 1600 years before Christ, the volcano of Thera on the island of Santorini, more than 60 miles away from Crete, or about 100 kilometers, erupted. It was no ordinary explosion. It was a catastrophe that consumed an entire region, 4 times more powerful than Krakatoa, hundreds of times more devastating than atomic bombs. The sea rose, and a tsunami dozens of feet high, perhaps 30 to 45 feet, or about 9 to 14 meters, rushed toward the shores of Crete like a towering white beast. No epic tells of the panic in Knossos that day. There was no one to record it. But imagine rooftops swallowed by water-crimson columns, crashing like snapped spines, frescoed walls of dolphins reduced to foam and blood. No army attacked, only nature enraged. The Minoans, unaccustomed to war, were left disoriented. Their palace had no fortress. They had no cavalry. They did not know how to defend. They had lived by trade, by ritual, by rhythm. But now, all of it was swept into chaos. The waters receded, but what remained was a fractured society. Fields turned saline. Trade routes collapsed. Water systems broke. Ceremonies halted. And worst of all, faith began to crumble. For a civilization built upon harmony between man and nature, the disaster destroyed not only structures, but ideals. When nature rages, does the goddess still listen? When rituals cannot stop the flood, does the dance still hold meaning? It was into this void that the Mycenaeans arrived from the north. They did not dance. They did not paint dolphins. They brought chariots, bronze swords, and a stratified vision of society. To them, power meant control, possession, domination. And Knossos, the city without walls, was an open invitation. Around 1450 years before Christ, Knossos fell. It is unclear whether it was conquered by force or collapsed from within. But after that moment, everything changed color. The frescoes lost their fluidity. Images of warriors, war horses, and angry deities began to appear. The Minoan script, linear A, was replaced by linear B, a coarser Greek-like script. Minoan culture was absorbed, and though the palace still stood, it no longer breathed with its old heartbeat. Knossos lingered under Mycenaean rule for a time, then burned for the final time around 1375 years before Christ. That fire did not merely consume timber and stone, it erased memory itself, the memory of a civilization that once dared to dream of softness. No one knows what started the blaze. Was it revolt, revenge? or simply the inevitable end of a place that had lost its soul. All we know is that afterward, Knossos went silent. The corridors that once echoed with dance now held only wind. The ceremonial rooms turned to ash. And that was the end. No farewell, no chronicle, no epic. A civilization vanished without a goodbye. We do not know what the Minoans thought in their final hour, but perhaps in the charred walls, in the broken columns, in the abandoned ritual chambers, there remains a whisper of a sigh. Because the death of Knossos was not the death of an empire. It was the death of a possibility. The possibility that humanity once lived without force, that it was possible to build a society on harmony rather than domination. And when that possibility died, history turned down another path. When Knossos burned, the entire Mediterranean shifted its rhythm. The age of art ritual and integration came to an end. The age of war, empire, and wrathful gods began. And the world since then has never returned to its original rhythm. Knossos did not fall in battle. It simply never learned how to defend itself. Knossos once vanished from the surface of history. No one spoke of it. No record remained. Only Greek fairy tales about a labyrinth, a minotaur, a spool of thread, and a young prince slaying a beast. As if everything that had once been real, once breathed, once lived, once loved, had been buried and turned into symbol. But symbols have a strange kind of power. They do not die. They wait. And then one day at the end of the 19th century, a man named Arthur Evans arrived in Crete, not with sword or conquest, but to listen to the call from beneath the earth. Evans was not the first to suspect that Greek myths might be rooted in truth, but he was the first to dig literally through layers of time in search of a city erased by centuries. In 1900, he began excavations at a hill called Kefala, and soon the stones began to rise. Columns, steps, chambers all emerged like a stone labyrinth, waking from thousands of years of sleep. Evans named the civilization Minoan after the legendary King Minos. But he did more than excavate. He rebuilt. With the passion of both archaeologist and artist, Evans did not merely restore ruins. He painted frescoes anew, reconstructed columns, and reimagined colors. And thus, Knossos today is not just archaeology, it is a stage for the rebirth of imagination. Some admire him for bringing the past back from the dust. Others criticize him for over-restoring blending fantasy with fact. But one thing no one denies, thanks to Evans, Knossos stepped out of myth and into mystery. What is the difference? A myth is something told so many times we think we understand it. A mystery is something the more we learn about the stranger it becomes. Knossos today is exactly that. Step into the ruins and you will see a city both ancient and modern. Crimson columns rebuilt in concrete. Frescoes repainted in vivid hues. Part of it is real original bricks, ancient walls, ceremonial chambers. Part of it is recreation colored in with guesses, with visions, with memories that may never have existed. This is the second labyrinth, the labyrinth of interpretation. Knossos is no longer a city only of the Minoans. It belongs to archaeologists, to artists, to tourists, to storytellers. It is a place where layers of meaning stack history, myth, theory, and emotion. That is why it lives. Unlike many ancient sites trapped in ropes of strict preservation, Knossos exists through constant rebirth. It is unafraid of imagination. It does not mind being called half real, half dream. For a dream, if beautiful enough, is also a kind of reality. You cannot come to Knossos in search of perfect accuracy, but you can come to feel a memory coming back to life through every stone, every drop of sunlight, every brushstroke of restoration. The legacy of Knossos does not lie in how much remains intact. It lies in its power to vanish and return. It teaches us that not all value lies in preservation. Some memories can only be passed on by retelling, and each generation tells them differently. Knossos today is not the Knossos of 1900, nor the Knossos of 1500 before Christ, but in every version it remains a space of haunting. Every fresco is a wound painted over. Every room is a question no one dares answer. Every column is a breath left unfinished. And perhaps the strangest thing is that very uncertainty makes Knossos feel closer. For what civilization has not been reinterpreted by those who followed? What memory has not been colored by imagination? What human life has not been lived in overlap between what is and what is longed for? Knossos is not ashamed to be called half real, half imagined, because it understands the greatest danger is not to be misunderstood, but to be forgotten. Knossos, the labyrinth of stone, was never just a place. It is a state of mind, an ancient emotional map drawn not with streets, but with corridors, with shadows, with unnamed turns. A place where people do not simply lose their way, but lose themselves. More than 500 years have passed since Knossos was abandoned, and though the walls have crumbled, the frescoes faded the light, there still flickers like a memory unwilling to dissolve, as if the city has not been freed, but is still waiting for someone to return, not to look, but to remember. And the one returning, that someone is us. We, the modern ones, armed with digital maps and satellites, still get lost within Knossos. Not because the labyrinth is too complex, but because some paths were never meant for the feet, but for the mind. Knossos does not demand that we understand it. It asks that we feel it, to feel the struggle of humanity as it faces the shadow of itself. That shadow in myth has a name, the Minotaur. For thousands of years, we have called him a monster. But if we strip away the grotesque form, what remains? A creature imprisoned. A being born of taboo. A child no one dared claim, no one dared love, no one dared let walk in the light. That is not a monster. That is truth locked away. Each of us carries such a part we hide, a part that does not fit into the order the world asks us to maintain. And so we build our own labyrinth around it, not with stone, but with silence, not with columns, but with shame, not with hallways, but with averted gazes. The Minotaur never truly died. Theseus may have slain his form, but not the symbol he carried. Because the moment he fell, his name was forgotten, his reason for existing erased, and the story rewritten as a triumph of reason. But what of the sorrow of the one killed simply for existing? What of the loneliness of a creature kept in darkness for failing to conform? Who tells that tale? Knossos, in a profoundly human way, built an entire city just to hide the part of ourselves that society cannot accept. And that is what makes it great. not its scale, not its architecture, but the fact that it stands as proof that even from our earliest beginnings we have known how to hurt, and we have known how to bury that pain in art, in ritual, in myth. When we come to Knossos, we do not come just to see ruins. We come to walk through our own minds, to face the parts we forgot, the corridors we dared not enter. The thread Ariadne gave Theseus was not merely a tool of escape. It was the line that connected light and shadow, reason and emotion, society and the self. And sometimes what we need most is not a way out, but the courage to go deeper. Knossos teaches us that, not through textbooks, but through its silent existence, through the way it allows itself to be misunderstood, through how it does not resist being reconstructed, being mythologized, being turned into a tourist destination, as if it knows anything still alive will always be reinterpreted. And the more it is reinterpreted, the more it proves it has not died. That city now is a kingdom outside of time, where every century layers like pigment, where every tourist's step becomes a new chapter in a book that will never be finished. Knossos no longer belongs to the Minoans. It belongs to those who have ever feared themselves, to those who have ever built a labyrinth in their hearts, to those who have ever locked their pain in darkness, to those who at long last found their way back to the center. And when they arrived, they did not slay the Minotaur. They embraced him. Paris, winter of 1894. In a tiny attic room where rain leaked through the tiles and the walls were blanketed with mold, a young woman stirred a pan of cloudy gray liquid with her bare hands. The wind slipped through the cracks of the old wooden door, making the oil lamp flicker. But she paid no attention. Her eyes were fixed on the solution her calloused hands kept stirring as if within that liquid lay a hidden star. Her name was Marie Sklodowska. No one in Paris knew that name. They called her something colder, the poor Polish student. Born in Warsaw under the rule of the Russian Empire, Marie grew up among forbidden lessons books hidden under the bed and secret classes organized by her father, a physics teacher. When the Russians banned the teaching of Polish, he still lit the oil lamp and taught his daughters about gravity, magnetism, and resilience. In the darkness of a severed education, Marie learned to view the world with defiance in her eyes. She dreamed of Paris, a place where women could attend university, where knowledge needed no passport. But that dream had to wait. For nearly a decade, she worked as a governess to support her sister's medical studies. Then it was her turn. Alone on a train across Europe, carrying a suitcase, a few coins, and all the hope that Warsaw could send. At the Sorbonne, the heart of French science. Marie was a quiet phenomenon. In classrooms full of men in black coats, there was only one small brown-haired girl sitting in the back row, the one no one remembered by name, yet always topped the class rankings. Each night she returned to a freezing room surviving on dry bread and hot water. But inside her burned a silent fire that needed no warmth, no witness. She did not study to graduate. She studied to understand. She did not stop at laws. She asked why there were laws. Quantum equations did not intimidate her. Hours in the lab did not exhaust her. Every formula she wrote was a bridge between reason and the infinite. She read in French, took notes in Polish, and dreamed in the language of the cosmos. One day, someone introduced her to a French physicist named Pierre Curie, a man with unruly hair, a quiet walk, but eyes that lit up whenever he spoke of crystal's voltage or gravitational force. They met during a conversation about magnetism, and soon after, Marie realized this was the first person who did not ask why she had chosen physics, but asked her, "Do you think magnetism could twist space?" Pierre did not see her as a woman in the laboratory. He saw a scientist. Marie did not see him as a husband. She saw a companion in an invisible expedition. They married without a honeymoon. Just one gift, 2 bicycles to ride through the French countryside discussing crystals and atoms. They did not build a house. They built a laboratory with sweat and dreams. And it was in that makeshift room amid cheap experiments that they began their search for a light no one had ever seen. Marie was fascinated by a strange phenomenon. Some substances seemed to emit energy without any external stimulus. She called it radioactivity, a word that had never existed before. While others tinkered with electric lights and telephones, Marie pondered the invisible forces passing through matter through people capable of destruction or healing. She chose to study a dull black ore discarded by others after they had extracted uranium. Its name was pitch blende, a seemingly useless rock that to her eyes was a symphony waiting to be written. And so she began the work of separating atoms from stone, with her hands, with her experiments, with her faith. When others went to sleep, she kept stirring. When winter froze everything, she kept taking notes. When society laughed at the idea of a new element, she calmly placed each result into test tubes like laying stones for a cathedral. No one funded her. No one supported her. But she had something they did not, a kind of light that glowed from within. Paris did not yet realize it. The world still thought science was a man's playground. But in an attic room, a woman was rewriting the very definition of light, not with words, but with her own existence. And that light, quiet, unassuming, was about to illuminate the entire 20th century. Paris, 1896. At the University of the Sorbonne each morning, as the bell rang, white professors strode through marble hallways exchanging lofty physics terms in sharp nasal French. At the back of the classroom, among a sea of black-coated male students, a small figure was always present on time, clutching a notebook filled with tiny handwriting. That was Marie Curie. No one invited her to join the debates. No one remembered her name. During laboratory sessions, others conversed, discussed theories. She was assigned only the measurements. Yet no one in the room knew that this woman had just completed 2 bachelor's degrees, one in physics and one in mathematics, within 2 years graduating at the top of both classes. In that era, women were not allowed to stand at the lectern. They could not publish scientific texts. They could not hold professorships. Most chose silence acceptance or departure. But Marie chose not to retreat. She chose not to become a woman in science, but a scientist regardless of gender. On cold mornings before the sun had fully risen, Marie arrived at the laboratory earlier than the janitor. When Pierre Curie walked in, he found her already heating test tubes, rearranging equipment, and chalking fresh formulas onto the blackboard. He did not see an assistant. He saw an ally. Pierre, a man with a soul soft as a magnetic field and a mind sharp as an electric current, became increasingly drawn into the whirlwind of Marie's intellect. He proposed to her in the language of physicists, "If you leave France, all that I am building will fall silent. But if you stay, we may together uncover the deepest secrets of matter." Marie agreed, not out of romantic affection. but because they shared a vision toward an uncharted destination, the atom. Their wedding had no white dress, no floral crown. Marie wore a gray gown, the same one she would continue to wear for years in the laboratory, because it is durable, clean, and does not catch on wires. They exchanged no rings, but pledged to one another a promise to research together, to labor together to face the world as one. Their laboratory received no funding. It was a dilapidated shed, once a horse butchery. Leaking roof-cracked walls, no ventilation system. But they needed little. Just a table, an electrometer, and blackboards filled with equations. In that place, two people, a woman dismissed by society, a man who rejected fame, began challenging the very fabric of matter. They believed that within the black ore, the remnants left after extracting uranium, lay an unknown element, a form of energy never before named, a light never yet measured. And so they began refining. Tons of pitchblende were brought in, crushed, boiled, precipitated, filtered, measured. In the shed, thick with the smell of metal, Marie boiled each sample, stirring for hours on end. Her hands blistered, her face covered in dust. No mask, no gloves, only conviction. One night, when the oil lamp had gone out, she saw a faint glow emerging from a sample in the dark. It was not a reflection, not a lamp. It was self-luminous, a form of energy emanating from the structure of matter itself. Marie called it radiation, a word that would become a destiny for all of humanity. But the scientific world was not quick to accept it. Journals refused to publish a woman's work. The Nobel Committee omitted her name from the list of nominees. They regarded the discovery as the work of Pierre Curie and Henri Becquerel. Pierre, who knew every formula was born from Marie's sweat, wrote a formal objection. He refused to accept any honor unless Marie was equally recognized. Finally, in 1903, the Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics to all three, and for the first time the name of a woman appeared in the annals of the most prestigious award on earth. Yet, when the press reported the news, they wrote Pierre Curie and his wife win Nobel Prize. No name, no title, no contribution. Marie read those lines in silence. She did not react. She did not protest. She returned to the laboratory, as always, to keep boiling solutions, taking notes, and searching for the second element. There are treasures not buried beneath pyramids or adorned with gemstones, but hidden deep underground beneath layers of dull gray ore thought to be worthless. Marie Curie called it a gift from Mother Earth, but like all ancient gifts, it came with a curse. In 1904, after receiving the Nobel Prize in Physics, Marie and Pierre Curie did not rest. On the contrary, they returned to their makeshift workshop, once a horse slaughterhouse, to continue an unfinished journey, the search for a second mysterious element. If polonium, the first element discovered by Marie, was a greeting from her homeland of Poland, then the next element was a dream of pure science, a substance that glowed in the dark, radiating energy constantly, without contact, without combustion. They called it radium. But to extract a single millionth of a gram of radium, they had to refine tons of pitchblende ore. No one offered help. There was no industrial equipment, only large iron pots, crude furnaces, and tireless hands. Marie stirred the liquid for hours on end as acid fumes burned her eyes, tore through her sleeves, and ate away at her shoes. They lived like medieval alchemists, surrounded by chemicals, toxic vapors, and an atmosphere thick with metal. Each step was a sequence of errors. Each passing week, a stack of notes grew thicker. They had no time for receptions, no mind for accolades. To them, discovering radium was not about fame. It was about proving that matter was not immutable, that even the smallest particles could erupt with light. And then one day, in a glass dish no larger than a fingertip, a pale crystal began to glow softly in the dark. It needed no illumination, no catalyst. It shone on its own, as if it were breathing. Radium was born. An element no one had ever named, no one had ever touched. Marie and Pierre did not rush to announce it. They checked, repeated, measured, rewrote atomic theory. They knew radium was not just a new element. It was evidence that energy could be released from the very structure of matter, an idea that would upend all of classical physics. In Marie's notes from that time, there was a simple haunting line: radium cannot be seen with the naked eye, but I see it with my heart. The scientific world began to take notice. Marie's samples of radium glowed steadily in the dark. People began using radium to examine bones, to treat cancer, to make luminous watches. Capitalists poured in money to mass produce it, but Marie refused to patent it. Knowledge belongs to humanity. A simple sentence, but one that became a symbol. While companies began to profit from radium, Marie and Pierre still rode bicycles to work, lived modestly, and continued teaching. But the price began to reveal itself. Marie's body weakened. Her eyesight faded. The skin on her hands blistered. She coughed often and suffered frequent nosebleeds. No one yet knew that ionizing radiation was silently destroying her cells. Pierre, too, began to show signs of fatigue, but he kept it hidden. And then tragedy struck, not in the lab, but on a cold, rainy afternoon in Paris. April 19th, 1906. Pierre Curie, while crossing the street, was struck by a horse-drawn cart. The wheels crushed his skull before the horrified eyes of bystanders. He died instantly. Marie did not cry in public. She said nothing to the press. She simply brought her husband's ashes home and sat through the night beside his unfinished notes. On the first page of a new notebook, she wrote, "Pierre is gone, but the work is not finished." She did not mourn with black fabric. She mourned with labor. 3 weeks later, Marie returned to the Sorbonne and stepped up to the lectern in her husband's place. It was the first time in history that a woman had taught science at the University of the Sorbonne. She did not begin the lecture with philosophy. She simply wrote on the board, "Today we continue with the structure of the atom." The entire hall fell silent. Marie did not teach with authority. She taught with memory, the memory of a man who believed in her and an atom that still glowed in the dark. Paris, 1911. Marie Curie stepped onto the stage to receive the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, becoming the first person in human history to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different fields, physics and chemistry. An unprecedented achievement, a triumph for all of humanity. The international press hailed her as the Queen of Radiation. The French Academy of Sciences could no longer ignore such a brilliant mind and was compelled to nominate her for membership, something never before done for a woman. She stood before the world with prematurely silver hair, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, a body worn down by radiation. yet her gaze remained as luminous as it had been the first time she discovered radium glowing in the dark. They saw in her a genius, but none understood that her glory had not come from blackboards or laboratories, but from the courage to battle layer upon layer of prejudice. Yet the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. Just weeks after the ceremony, the French media erupted with scandal. Marie Curie has an affair with Paul Langevin, Pierre's former student. Paul, a young physicist who had once sat in the front row of Marie's lectures, had long been separated from his wife. But French society cared nothing for the truth. They could not accept that a widowed immigrant woman of Slavic origin, and a scientist no less, should have the right to love. The headlines screamed. Her image was defamed, her home flooded with hate mail and threats. She was called a husband thief, the radium witch, the scientific whore. She did not explain. Not once did she grant an interview. Each morning she still walked to the laboratory, took notes, adjusted her instruments, and taught physics to her daughter at home. Albert Einstein, then in Berlin, wrote her a letter with a single line: "Do not read the newspapers. Lift your head high. You belong to heights which the petty cannot reach." She never replied to his words, but she kept them for life. That year, the Nobel Committee sent her a letter suggesting she not attend the Stockholm ceremony, as public opinion is currently unfavorable. She held the letter, read it slowly, then set it down. And she went anyway. As she entered the Grand Hall of Stockholm, all eyes turned toward her, half in admiration, half in suspicion. But Marie Curie had not come seeking approval. She had come to affirm a truth. Intelligence has no gender. Dignity requires no permission. In her hands was a speech, not long, not ornate, but each line carved like stone. Radium, though born from darkness, is not a monster. It is light. But how mankind chooses to use that light will determine what happens next. She did not speak of scandal. She did not mention personal pain. She spoke only of science, of responsibility, of the future. When she finished, the hall fell silent for a few seconds, and then stood up applauding, not for a woman, but for a mountain. Back in Paris, she returned once more to the laboratory. No title could make her stop. She began building a new research institute, the Radium Institute, not only for scientific discovery, but to train women as scientists. She welcomed young women from across Europe, those barred from universities because of their gender, their origins, their poverty. She taught them to measure radiation, analyze samples, record data. No concern for nationality. No questions about who their parents were. In a letter she once wrote, "If I had to walk that path alone, then the next generation should not have to walk it alone." Marie did not want to build a monument. She wanted to build a hallway for others to walk through. When the first foundation stones of the Radium Institute were laid in Paris, Marie Curie invited no church, no nobility, held no ceremony of consecration. She said, "This place worships no deity. It worships knowledge." In an era when women were still forbidden from wearing trousers in public, she built a temple of thought, where women were allowed to hold test tubes to give lectures, to enter laboratories without asking permission. She did not merely study radium. She liberated radium from the confines of the laboratory and turned it into an instrument of healing. Marie began experimenting with irradiating tumors, a concept no one had dared to be certain of. but she believed light could save lives. Every patient who came to the institute, she did not just measure and record. She spoke with them, held their hands, called them by name. She did not wear a white lab coat. She wore wool sweaters, her sleeves dusted with radium, but her eyes never showed fatigue. While capitalists began exploiting radium to make cosmetics, glowing watches, and so-called health water, Marie refused to patent any formula. She gave the world full access to her discoveries, for free. Radium is not for profit. It is light, and light must be shared. Critics called her naive. Financial newspapers called her a fool. But Marie did not need to be understood. She believed in one thing: only what is given without demand lasts forever. Then came the war. In 1914, the sound of cannons echoed across Europe. The First World War turned Paris into a front line, hospitals into hell, and the bodies of soldiers into problems of life and death. Marie Curie, then 47 years old, did not go to the front with a gun, but with light. She personally designed a mobile device called the Petites Curies, small trucks equipped with X-ray machines operable directly on the battlefield. She learned to drive to repair machines to perform military medical procedures, and with her daughter, Irene, drove straight to the trenches. Each day, they X-rayed hundreds of soldiers, shrapnel in lungs, broken bones, foreign objects in skulls. Thanks to X-rays, surgeons could operate with precision, saving tens of thousands of lives. No rank, no salary, no medals, only light. Marie trained hundreds of nurses and young doctors in how to operate the equipment. She conducted X-ray training courses at hospitals, filming by night, teaching by day. She wrote in her diary, "If light can penetrate flesh, then humanity can penetrate war." After the war, she returned, exhausted, emaciated, partially blind in one eye, her hair fully white. But she still did not rest. The world began to realize the woman they once doubted, once vilified, had become a living legend. The President of the United States invited her to visit. Scientists built statues in her honor. Schools, laboratories, and prizes began bearing the name Marie Curie. But she asked for only one thing: build a laboratory where children can touch their first atom with their own hands. She used all the money from her American trip to purchase radium, not for herself, but for the research institute. She did not keep a single coin. Radium to the world was white gold. To her, it was a candle, burning itself, to light the way for others. When gunfire rang out in Sarajevo in the summer of 1914, Europe plunged into a rift that could not be healed. The First World War was not merely a war between nations, it was the collapse of an entire civilization. Amid the chaos, Marie Curie, a two-time Nobel laureate, did not choose to stay in Paris. She looked at the map of the war front, at the stream of wounded soldiers pulled to the rear lines, then turned to her daughter Irene and said, "If science cannot save people at their most painful moments, then it is nothing more than a game." Marie did not bring a crown of science. She brought a blueprint. A simple design, a truck mounted with an X-ray machine capable of reaching any battlefield so that doctors could locate shrapnel before picking up the scalpel. A life-saving tool, made of light. No budget was granted. No one believed she could do it. But Marie needed no one's approval. She wrote letters calling for donations, sold her jewelry. exchanged her Nobel gifts for equipment, even persuaded truck manufacturers to assemble vehicles for free. And within months, the first was born Petite Curie, little Curie. She taught herself to drive, taught herself mechanics, personally checked every machine. She would not let anyone die from her mistake. In the winter of 1915, the Battle of the Somme erupted. The wind lashed her face, mud reached her knees. Amid rubble and corpses, a truck rolled into the trenches. Inside, a gray-haired woman in a black wool coat held a flashlight and whispered to a soldier who had lost half a leg, "Do not be afraid. This light will find the bullet in your chest." Marie was not just an inventor. She became a technician, a field medic, a driver, a teacher, and a mother to thousands of soldiers. Over 2 years, she drove the Petite Curie across more than 20 battlefields. She X-rayed over 1 million soldiers. She trained more than 150 women to operate the X-ray equipment, transforming them into angels of light. Her daughter, Irene Curie, then just 18, followed her to the front, wore military uniform, learned to take radiographs and measure radiation. And like her mother, she did not ask permission to become the first woman to perform X-rays in war. They asked for no honors, no privileges, only electricity chemicals and a patch of land to set up camp. Marie once wrote, "We do not heal the wounds, but we show the doctors where to save." The war ended in 1918. The guns fell silent. But Marie's body was no longer whole. Her vision faded. Her blood was frequently poisoned. She suffered from chronic insomnia and persistent coughing. Her body had long since become a laboratory for radiation. Doctors advised her to rest. The press called her the unsung hero. But Marie Curie responded only with action. She began again. She rebuilt the Radium Institute. She wrote textbooks. She established scholarships for women to pursue physics. She helped develop X-ray systems for major hospitals. Then came a special invitation from the United States, where journalists, physicians, and the government wished to present her with 1 gram of pure radium worth over $100,000 at the time, so she could continue her research. When she arrived in America, a national reception was held. But Marie brought only an old suitcase containing 1 lab coat, 1 notebook of formulas, 1 lead box to store the radium if granted. She did not speak of politics, gave no long speeches. She only thanked the United States, not for the honor, but for believing in light. At the radium presentation ceremony, someone asked her, "What do you think is your greatest legacy?" Marie paused for a moment, then replied, "Not the radium, not the Nobel. But when my daughter said, 'Mother, you taught me that true light comes from within.'" Paris, 1934. Marie Curie lay in a quiet room at the Radium Institute, the place she had built from bricks of hope. Her eyes had dimmed, no longer able to distinguish light, a bitter tragedy for someone who had spent her life surrounded by invisible radiance. Her blood no longer clotted as before. Her lungs were scarred, and the skin on her hands, the same hands that once touched pure radium, had shriveled to the point of pain. Doctors called it aplastic anemia, but she knew. All those years of exposure to radiation, that mysterious light no one yet fully understood, had slowly killed her. Marie Curie, the first to tame the atom, would die by its hand. But she did not complain. She did not call it a price. In her final diary, she wrote only 1 line, "I have lived fully." And that is what matters. The death of Marie Curie did not echo like that of a head of state. There was no national mourning, no flag draped over her coffin, but in the hearts of millions, students, doctors, patients, scientists, a candle was lit, not with fire, but with respect. She was buried beside Pierre, in a modest grave in Sceaux. The tombstone bore no mention of the Nobel Prize, no list of achievements, only her name and the years of her birth and death, like any other human being, because she had never lived to be remembered. She lived to be continued. In 1995, the French Republic made a historic decision to move the remains of Marie Curie to the Panthéon, the resting place of France's greatest. She became the first woman to be honored there for her own achievements, not her husband's. When workers dressed in protective suits opened her coffin, they found all her personal belongings, her notebooks, her pens, even her lab apron, still radioactive. Even in death, she glowed. Marie's legacy does not reside in a museum. It lives in the hearts of those who dare to learn to seek to endure solitude. Her daughter, Irene Joliot-Curie, carried the torch forward, continued the study of the atom, and was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1935. Mother and daughter, 2 generations, 2 laureates, forming one of the rarest Nobel lineages in history. And Marie, though no longer alive, remains present in every hospital, using radiation therapy in every classroom, teaching atomic structure in every hand that lifts a test tube held by a young girl discovering for the first time that she too can become a scientist. A poet once wrote, "Not everyone who shines wants to be seen. Some choose to glow, only to light the path for those who come after." Marie Curie was like that. She had no commanding portrait, no provocative quote, no grand theory bearing her name. But she had something the world needs most, a living example of resilience, of selfless intellect, of the enduring power of inner light. Today, more than a century later, when astronauts take X-rays in space, when doctors destroy cancer cells with beams of radiation, when students first encounter the symbol Ra on the periodic table, all of it is a whisper from Marie Curie. No light lasts forever, but the right light at the right time in the right place can save an entire civilization. Marie Curie left behind no system of doctrines. She left behind a mirror. And through that mirror, each generation is given the chance to look into itself and ask, do we dare to live for something greater than ourselves?